Hello, everyone. I'm Christine Gritman, and this is Let's Talk About Brand. I do this show every single Friday at 12 noon Eastern, where we talk about different elements of branding with experts. And I want to make sure everyone knows that I also have a Tuesday Twitter chat. It's also at noon Eastern. Tuesday, I have Chat About Brand over on Twitter, where we discuss the same topic as we're discussing with the guest expert on Friday's show. This show is running live right now on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So please tell us if you're joining live or on the replay, and also tell us what platform you're joining from. Let's Talk About Brand and Chat About Brand have an awesome group of Patreon supporters. I love them. They're wonderful, and they are working on their personal brands along with all of us. So thank you very much to my Patreon members. I'm going to list them out later. And thank you to all of you watching. So this week's topic is branding with language. Of course, we choose the words that we want to use partially based on meaning and on specific nuances of meaning, but it also gives a lot of information about who we are, the tone we're using, and it can even impact how we come across to people and the impression that we leave. Today's guest has been on our show several times before, the wonderful Stephanie Liu. She does all sorts of amazing things. She is a marketer, she is a live streamer, she is a live producer, she is a trainer. And one of the things we're talking about today is the fact that she is also an NLP practitioner and trainer, and also a trained hypnotist. So she really knows how to use her words to get different messages and information and feelings and impact across to different people. So without any further ado, we are going to bring on Stephanie. Hello, Stephanie. How are you today?
Hi, how are you?
Good. So let's leap right in. I feel like you've made a much bigger shift. You've done NLP for a while, but I feel like it's become much more of a focus for you recently. So I'd love if you could just start out by telling us all a little bit about what NLP is and how you initially got into it.
Yeah, NLP is neuro-linguistic programming. And what that really means, it's understanding how your brain works, how it functions, how you process information, and why it is that you do the things that you do. And the reason why it's so helpful is because when you understand the principles of NLP, it's also very helpful when you're working with clients. Because with your clients, you want to understand their model of the world. What's their values, beliefs, and attitudes? How do they make their decisions? How do they get motivated to do whatever it is that they need to do, whether it's to get healthy, whether it's to invest in themselves or do any of those things. And NLP really came about, Christine, when I was working in the ad agency world. I was always a part of the pitch team. And it was one of those things where it's like everyone has their own natural way of communicating, the way that we tell stories. I naturally speak very fast, right? And I talk a lot with my hands and I jump from one idea to the other because that's just naturally how I communicate. But I know that when I'm in the boardroom, I have to understand what the communication style is for every key stakeholder that's sitting in that room. So, whether they're auditory, kinesthetic, auditory, digital, or visual, just like me. And as I'm pitching, I have to recalibrate my message to really understand whether or not I'm really resonating with them, right? Because the meaning of communication is the response that you get.
That's a really good point. The meaning is the response. I mean, the whole point isn't just to communicate how we want to communicate. It's to communicate to be heard. It's about the receiving end. Yeah. You mentioned a couple things in there about, kinesthetic and all these things. If you could kind of take us back through that a little bit, because I've seen you present on that, and it was mind-blowing. It was a complete paradigm shift in my head.
Complete shift, yeah.
Yeah.
So in the NLP world, there's 4 different ways that we communicate. There's visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and auditory digital. And visual communicators are usually the ones that speak really fast and they have ideas and they have pictures inside their head because that's what they see. They're able to imagine what the big picture is. And because that picture can fade away so quickly, we speak really fast and we jump from one idea to the other. More often than not, when we're communicating, we're kind of speaking really fast and we're breathing up here. right? And we talk a lot with our hands. And so when you're in a conference or when you're in a networking call and you see someone just like, I don't know, like jumping out with all these ideas, they're most likely going to be a visual communicator. And we talk really fast. And so if you wanted to really capture our attention, you have to do that same thing. And you also have to use words that are leveraging visual things. Like, let me highlight that for you. Or here's a spotlight. Or here's the big picture. Imagine. There's certain trigger words that visual communicators really hone in on and like to focus. And then you have your auditory communicators, and your auditory communicators are more of the ones that like to hang on to every single word because they really want to hear you, right? And they really want to hear what it is that you have to say. And so, because they want to hear what you have to say, sometimes you have to slow down, you have to articulate. Sometimes you have to leverage the pauses in a way that's really going to help your message stand out. There are other words that you could use that are auditory. So things like, does that ring a bell? Or, let's get your audience buzzing with excitement. There's certain things that you say when they're auditory related, it's just music to their ears. Then you have kinesthetic communicators. And kinesthetic communicators are generally the ones where they're trying to feel things out. Sometimes, I've always worked with clients. I'm like, okay, so what are your goals? And like they'll sit there and they'll stare for a second because they're trying to feel like what feels right, what feels comfortable for them. And so kinesthetic keywords to really resonate with them and make them feel comfortable and confident in their decision could be things like, well, let's go ahead and review this proposal page by page so that way we're all on the same page. Or how do you feel about X, Y, and Z? Something around things where when I'm working with clients and we're talking about goals, I'd always ask them, well, what would that do for you? How would that make you feel? Right. And I think more often than not, when you're asking them these questions, or even when you're communicating with a kinesthetic communicator, is give them time to respond. Because more often than not, as a visual communicator, right? Because I speak so fast, if I'm talking to someone that is kinesthetic, it's like, I'm waiting and I'm like, oh man, come on, like spit it out already. But you have to give the kinesthetic person enough time to warm up to you. And this is also very helpful too when you're a speaker. So that's kinesthetic. The very last one is auditory digital. Auditory digital, we're all about process frameworks. If we do this, how will that get this to be over there? What are the steps? What are the process to do that? And so when you're pitching to someone like, hey, I want you to sponsor my show. And because I think that I have this big picture value to offer your audience, this is like a sequence of series of episodes that we can do to get us from point A to point B. And there's a whole strategy behind it because you're laying it out in front of them. And so for an auditory digital communicator, that's beautiful.
So now here's the question. How do you know who you're communicating with? Understanding your own communication style is super important so that you know how to shift it. I'm clearly the, what is it, visual, because I'm all about like the spotlight and all things like that. I mean, you can see, my goodness.
Yeah.
But how do we know who we're, I mean, to Tim's point here, it's a good idea to realize what works for you may not work with others. So how do we know what type of communicator we're trying to communicate with?
Yeah. More often than not, Christine, whenever I am pitching a new client or I'm communicating with someone, I'll take a look at the email that they sent over. And just as I said to you, you could circle, underline, highlight certain words that are related to any of those 4 different communication styles. And because the way that we speak unconsciously just flows through us, like things that we post on social media, we don't often overthink it, right? It's more like, hey, this is what I did, blah, 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 blah. And even when you say, hey, this is what I did, it could be like, this is what I did over the weekend. And if that person is like listing all the things that they did, right? That's an auditory digital person. And if and if the keywords that they're using are visual, right? Like, look, imagine, highlight, this was like the brightest part of my day, the highlight of my day, things like that. You want to write them down. That's how you're going to realize what their communication styles are, is understanding what keywords they're using across their emails, their social media, or even when you just have them on the phone. And oh goodness, I feel so antiquated by saying phone, right? But, let's say
Phone,
Zoom,
what's that?
right? I know, but you know what? Honestly, okay, this is a kind of a sidetrack.
Ooh,
Christine, I'm finding that a lot of my clients these days just like to talk on the phone.
and no one's doing it, so you're feeling that need and standing out.
Yeah, it's just, sometimes we relate on a level of, hey, let's not hop on a Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just talk and get things done. Yeah, that was cool.
Absolutely. Well, that just explain. It's funny you're explaining me to myself, just because I'm realizing I'm like I'm terrified of the phone, but I'm cool with the Zoom. I think because I can see
You
the
can
person,
see.
so I can
Yeah.
understand how they're reacting because I
Yeah.
get to give those visual cues for
Okay,
them.
so here's the thing. As a visual communicator, sometimes it's easy for us to be on a live stream or on a Zoom because we talk with our hands. Sometimes we can't find the right words. Remember earlier I asked you a question, you're like, you're
Yeah.
like, my hands should explain it, Steph. And I was like,
Yes.
I was like, woman, use your words. But
I so
is it,
did that. My words, by the way, I'm jet lagged, so my words
no,
are
that's
like in the
fine.
UK right now.
Yeah, but that's the thing though. I think with visual communicators, we love live streaming because we could use our hands, or we could just like, let me just show you. And we're like, let
Yes.
me just screen share. And if you're talking to someone that's auditory, sometimes they just want to hear it. And so that could be a
Mhm.
barrier for visual communicators if someone only wants to talk to you on the phone,
Yeah.
right? Or it could also be a barrier for someone who is a visual communicator, and you do have someone hop on a Zoom call, but the client doesn't want to have their camera on because they're doing other things in the background. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I don't know if I'm connecting. I don't know if I'm resonating because it's not my usual communication style, right? And so you have to be flexible in the way that you communicate, and that's the whole purpose and reason for NLP is the person that is most flexible in their communication style will always be in the lead.
Ooh, I like that. So, to that end, if we're talking about brand communications, whether it's like a larger consumer brand or even just our own personal brand, a lot of times we're communicating one to many. So for one
Yes.
to one, it's easy to flex and connect in, reading what the person wants. But when we're doing one to many, how can we, well, two things, really, two sort of separate questions on different levels. I'll let you
Do you
handle
see how
whatever
this
order.
is a visual communicator
Yes,
over
I
here and
do.
all the different questions that come up? She's a visual
Absolutely.
communicator. She's like, wait, oh, and there's this one. Oh, and this one. And then part of me is like, I have
Let's
to
see.
remember all of these questions.
Yeah, so I'll do it one by one. I'll break this into two then. So, first of all, how do we make sure that we're able to sort of hit everybody in a way?
Oh, I
Because,
love that
or
you asked
do
this
we
question.
even, do we even, do we
Yeah.
just say, screw it? This is how we communicate. I mean, how hard do you have to flex for one to many?
I think it's really up to you, right? I would say for most solopreneurs and entrepreneurs, right? They really want to hone in on their audience and just be like, "Hey, if I'm a visual communicator, this is how I communicate. And if you don't like it, then we don't have to work together, right?" And that's more power to that person. That's how they communicate. That's how they want to work. However, I'm the type of person where it's like, man, if I just have to make a small tweak to what I have to say. And instead of only getting one of those communication styles, I could capture all four. Well, guess who gets to go on the vacation a lot faster? Right? So, as far as like the one to many, a lot of times when I'm on stage, right? I'm hyped up. I've done like the whole thing. Man, I've done like some push-ups. I'm like super hyped, and I get on stage, and it's a matter of like, how do you work the entire room? And so, what we talked about earlier is the different communication styles. And kinesthetic people, you got to warm them up, right? They have to start building that confidence and getting comfortable with you as a speaker when you are on stage. And then you want to get the auditory people because the auditory people, if we're sitting in the middle of the convention center in San Diego, there's all these different things going on. You have to help them like zone out every other thing that's happening in the background and capture their attention. Then the next thing that usually happens is like, okay, so now that you've got the kinesthetic and the auditory, boom, jump into your visual. This is when you're going to start future pacing. It's like, look, listen. So now that you've been sitting here for the past 3 days at whatever conference it is, let me tell you what you're going to walk away with in the next 45 minutes. Just imagine what it would be like if you had boom, boom, boom. I do this at every single presentation, and it gets the whole audience going as far as that goes. And the thing about this too is, now I'm talking about a live audience, right? The thing about this, Christine, is that when you do that hook, right? This is what we call the charisma pattern. You do kinesthetic, auditory, and visual in that specific order. That's the charisma pattern. When you do that, as you're on stage, right? When you're on stage and you're presenting as a speaker, you are in what we call peripheral vision, meaning you are looking right here, but you can see how everyone else is reacting in the entire audience. And as you are opening up with that, you can see how many people are shifting whenever you're doing the kinesthetic keywords, when you're doing auditory or visual. And that is when you start, okay, this is how I'm going to recalibrate my message.
That's an incredible point, which is paying attention to the audience. Some people, when they suffer with stage fright or whatever, they sort of, focus on a point above the audience. That's not going to give you that feedback. That's not going to give you that connection and that experience that you can use to then shift what you're doing to make a greater connection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, that's an incredible tool right there.
Yeah. Christine, just I think it was probably last week, I was invited to speak at a university for college students to talk about what it is that I do and whatnot. And then the professor had said, like, well, you know what, Stephanie, they're going to be doing a presentation next week. What are some of your tips? Because they're going to be doing it in person. And everything that I just told you right now is like, look, listen, these are things that you could start taking notes on, that you could start taking action on. But I would say, if you're the type of person where, as Christine said, you might have like stage fright, right? The best advice that I can give you is find 3 friends in the audience, and put them at 11 o'clock, right? 12, and then at 1. And the reason for that is because when you're giving your presentation, when you're delivering your key points, you want to lock eyes with your friends. You're like, you know what? This is what I want you to know. Look at that person, finish that line, then look at the next person, make your point. And now it feels as if you are connecting with the entire audience in that big, massive room. I mean, it could also be like 30, 40 people and whatnot. But that's a really good way to resonate, because when you're looking in that specific direction, everyone in that area and that quadrant is like, oh, she's talking to me. She's talking to me. And then you address them over here and you address them over there, and they're like, oh, got it.
I love that. So you've got your kind of proxies set up. You have proxy for this entire section. I love that. So when we're talking about things that are one-to-many that are maybe not live, and by the way, I just want to put in Rose Horowitz's comment, which is, as a journalist, and a lot of people, I mean, it really kind of is journalism when you come down to it. You are telling stories.
Yeah.
But when she's interviewing people in person, or on the phone or on a live stream, it's good to be able to adjust your interview style as well, so that that conversation flows, and so that you can really make that connection that will get them to open up. Honestly, when you're interviewing with someone, that's the biggest thing, asking them the questions that get them to open up and give you their story.
Yeah.
So that's when we're live. That's when we're having conversations. That's when we're live one-to-many. What can brands do when they're just, say, putting together their social media content, putting together their website, putting together their copy, things that where they don't get that back and forth quite as immediately? How can they make sure that the language that they're using not only will resonate, but that also will resonate in a specific way that's branded to them?
Okay. Well, let's see how much you're paying attention. I went, no. Come back.
I
I'm gonna
will.
flip it on you.
All right, do it.
Based on everything that you heard right now, what I told you about speaking to a person with a live audience, how do you think you would be able to apply that in an email or a landing page or even a social media post? And I think your camera froze. There you go.
Yeah, there.
How do you think?
I really like what you said about how having a kind of set of keywords for each, in a sense. So as a brand, we should already have kind of keywords in mind of what we want to get across and what feels like us. And then further segmenting those into figuring out, do I have enough of those keywords that evoke something visual? Do I have enough of those keywords that evoke something auditory? Do I have enough of those keywords that evoke something? I'm less clear on the kinesthetic and on the digital thing. I'm least clear on that, and I would love a little bit more clarity on that so that I can do that. But just getting that sense of, do I have verbiage and words that simultaneously speak to each of those and evoke the right feelings for my brand? Because ding,
Yeah.
ding, ding.
You nailed it. You nailed it. And you see how
Hey, for
easy
your
that was
auditory
to teach?
ding, ding, ding.
Ding, ding, ding. Yeah. So let's clarify on what kinesthetic is, right? Kinesthetic is this is a feeling that they have when they're communicating. And sometimes they might not have the right words for it because there's like a feeling in their body. But if you're looking for keywords specifically around that, it could be, you know, how does that make you feel? Or have you ever felt? Or let's wrap your brain around this. Or are we on the same page? Are you comfortable with that idea? Other keywords that I love to use when it comes to feel would be, buzzing with excitement. That's actually a 2-for-1. That's auditory and excitement as a feeling, right? Just imagine what it would feel like if you were to only work 6 months out of the year, and then the second half of the year, you don't even have to worry about it because you've already laid out your live stream, your retirement channel, your Amazon product videos, all the different things, and now you just have recurring revenue. And I think if you're a kinesthetic person, you'd be like, whoa, wait a second. That feels amazing. And so that would be your kinesthetic. Your auditory digital would most likely want to know how. Like, what's the onboarding process if I decide to work with you? How quickly can we get this done? What are the steps? What's your strategy? What's your signature style? What's your signature program? How do we work together? They want to know into like, what's the process for it? Because it's important for them to know that you actually have a process. And this is kind of like what we were talking about before is that, even as a live streamer, if you wanted to pitch a brand, what's the process for actually working with you? Or let's say you're the brand. If you're a brand reaching out to me and saying, Stephanie, we want to work with you, I would want to know, okay, from an auditory digital perspective, well, what are your goals for 2022? What are you looking to accomplish? And how do you see yourself going there? And where do you see me fitting into that process? Not only that, though, but if I do decide to sign with you to be your influencer, to be your ambassador, what is it like to work with you? Are you just going to say, hey, here's your monthly deposit, but then every time I run a show, you're not going to show up? You're not going to promote my work? It's just kind of, I do your bidding because you pay for me, right? Does that make sense? So there are different ways to really leverage the kinesthetic and the auditory digital. Did that clarify that for you? Is that
It
clearer?
did. Yes,
Okay.
it definitely helped. Now, one question regarding the branding thing is there ever, okay, so ideally we're all communicating to all the types as much as we can in terms of combining, stacking those words together so
Sure.
that we can paint a picture for everyone. Paint a picture. There I go.
Now you're picking up on what you say, right?
Yes,
I mean, honestly, Christine,
it's
it's one of those
horrible. I'm
things where
analyzing all of it.
it when people learn, and let me tell you, the
Thank you.
whole entire NLP, what we teach you, it's a lot. And so what you just learned right now is like this much. Like Vanessa
Yeah,
Cabrera can even tell you, it's only this much.
matrix just
And
opens.
you're already fine tuning and you're paying attention to what it is that you have to say.
Yeah. So the question is there ever a circumstance where a brand maybe specifically does want to mostly hammer in and hone in on one of those types of communication? Because maybe just they really actively want to connect on their audience on one of those levels in particular, and they don't care as much about the others. Is that ill advised to sort of tunnel yourself in that way, or is it sometimes an okay thing for a brand to do because this is just how they roll?
Honestly, it's however which way you wanna run your own business, right? And I would say more often than not, your CEO, your CMO would want to go ahead and blanket the market as much as possible because the more consumers that you can target, the bigger the revenue that you're going to have. However, there are some people where they're just kinda like, "You know what?" It's kinda like dating, right? It's kinda like dating where you're like, this is the type of person that I want, and that's who they wanna hone in, and I find more often than not, brands will just hone in on that one specific persona, right? And that's what all of their communication style and their branding strategy is going to be around. But eventually, at one point, when you hit like year 5 of your business and you want to increase, let's say, your monthly recurring revenue by X percentage, there has to be something different in your strategy in and of itself, where you're not necessarily increasing your expenses, but now you're drawing in more people. And so that's lead harvesting. And so when you're lead harvesting, you want to make sure that you're opening it not to just one, but to multiple people that you can include. So that would be my advice.
That makes sense, and you've shown us how to do it, so we really have no excuse. So Rose has a question,
Yeah.
which is when you, as a social media manager, are talking to a possible client, isn't it hard to really know how they'll communicate and support you? So, to your point, you can look for some clues in the initial communications and see what types of word that they use, but sometimes you can't always see that. So, what are some other ways to sort of tease that out, either in advance or on the fly?
That's such an interesting question. Bring it up again. Put it back on the screen. But, yeah, so the question is, when you as a social media manager are talking to a possible client, isn't it hard to really know who they will communicate and support you? So, for my practitioners that are tuning in, what's the presupposition that's already in this sentence, in this question? It says, "Isn't it hard to really know?" That's already presupposing that it's hard. Does that make sense, Christine? There's already a belief here that it's hard to really know who they will communicate and support with. That in and of itself, that's already like, what when did you decide that it would be really hard to really know that they'll communicate and support you?
And that's something that you said to me at the beginning of when our conversation before we went live, because I was talking to you about something where I was coming from a place of almost assumed failure.
Yeah, like why so this question in and of itself is already telling like what
Yeah.
makes you think that it's already going to be hard if you're going into a conversation with a possible client and you're already like, you know what, 51% of this call is already going to fail because I already think that it's hard. Why would you do that? Why?
How do we fix that?
Well, focus on what you want, right? I would say more often than not, people, when they're thinking about the next big thing that they want to do, they focus on all the things that could go wrong. Oh, but what
Yeah.
if this and what if that and blah, blah, blah. And you've heard me say this before, where your attention goes, energy flows. Where your attention goes, energy flows. And so, why focus on the things that you don't want? Why not focus on the fact that because you've mastered your communication skills, because you now know 4 different communication styles just from this show alone, you're going to look at your emails differently. Heck, I've even had Christine, I've had a student of ours go back at her emails and look at all the deals, just the deals that she had lost. And
Yeah.
that's where she saw the miscommunication. That's where
That's what
she's
I'm
like,
gonna do right after
"Crap,
this.
that's where I
Spending the
dropped the ball."
afternoon, yeah, I'm spending the afternoon looking back at all those people who were like, we made a connection, it sounded good, but then it just kind of fell short. I'm gonna look back at all of those and be like, all right, what am I gonna do now?
What do
How am I
you
gonna take this forward?
Yeah, yeah. The thing is too, I think someone else had mentioned this in the comments, it's helpful, yes, to know your own communication style, and it's helpful, yes, to know another person's communication style. So when are you going to decide that you're gonna learn the other communication styles and start communicating that way? You know? Flexibility in language and your branding, that's always gonna be very helpful. I love Rose's comment. She's like, good advice, good point. Yeah.
Always. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been just the most value packed short conversation like ever, just because I think all of us have immediately actionable things that we
Oh,
can
yeah.
just go and do, and this whole new paradigm to look through things through. Now, you help people do that in a much more comprehensive way. So, can you tell everyone? In general, how and where and why they should find you, but in particular, how they can find you to help them with this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, listen, if you're interested in increasing your influence, your impact, and really being able to ignite your ideas in a way that people will just always remember you, our next NLP practitioner training is going to be in April of 2022. And it's a 7-day jam packed intensive training. I'm not going to lie to you, because if I could help you in 7 days level up your language in a way that you could captivate on command, that's all it takes. 7 days. So it's April 2022. That's our NLP practitioner. And then August/July is when we have our NLP practitioner training. Both trainings are actually done virtually. So wherever you are, you're more than welcome to attend and be a part of our cohort. I think in our last cohort, we had someone from Australia, and it was really fun. And so we've had people in Chicago and Texas and California all tune in, be a part of it. And in 7 days, they become a board certified NLP practitioner, practitioner in timeline therapy, hypnotherapy, and NLP coaching. So this is something that if you decide to do VIP coaching, workshops, speeches, keynotes, all those different things, when you're able to hone in on language in such a way that you can be brilliant in the boardroom and ignite your ideas, an NLP practitioner is really it.
That's amazing. I would love it if you could actually go or send to me the link where people can sign up for that, because I
Yeah.
think that this is something people need. And I know for a fact that it's something that I need. Yeah. And yeah. So I think that I will be seeing you virtually in April for sure.
Yeah.
I
Come
have
on
friends
through.
training, and
Yeah.
it's a total game changer. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, for being here. This has been fantastic. Always wonderful having you back. Can't wait to see you in person, probably in March. And then, of course,
Yeah. You'll be in
April.
San Diego. I'll
Yeah.
see you then.
I'll see you then. I can imagine it. I can see it in my mind's eye. But thank you so much for being here
You're the
today
best.
and for being such a great support always.
Of course.
As I said, I am Christine Gritman. I do this show every Friday at noon, and I have a Twitter chat on Tuesdays that I also want to make sure everyone knows about. The Twitter chat next coming Tuesday, the 16th, is all about branding with personality. And we're talking about that on Twitter on Tuesday, because right here on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube on Friday, we're going to be talking to Brittany Crosson, who is also known as that lady on TikTok and Instagram who dances on her treadmill. And she is a social media strategist, but she's dancing on her treadmill. What does that have to do with social media? Whatever it is working for her, and she's going to talk about why. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that you'll join us next week too. Bye. Oops. And my video clip isn't working for my outro. There we go. Woohoo! We are live, folks. But thank you so much for being here, and do check in and let us know again where you're joining us. Are you joining us on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, or on YouTube? And where will you join us next week? Where the video will be working. Yay! Bye.